Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of my ongoing series on how to paint Reichbusters by Mythic Games. And be sure to check out the earlier episodes because I explain my philosophy behind painting these, which is to do them quickly, but still looking good. So we're not going to muck around with perfect paint jobs here. These are relatively quick and easy paint jobs, but they still look good on the tabletop. And they will make sure that instead of having a big box full of unpainted plastic, you have a beautiful set which is all painted and looks great when you play your games of Reichbusters. So let's get started. We're going to start on these Nazi scientists. And here he is holding a canister of vril, that dangerous, weird stuff that... You know, there are still people who believe in the vril society and Nazi occult organisations and things like that. It's crazy, isn't it? Vril was invented by a 19th century writer. So many weird things that people believe in conspiracy theories these days actually go back to 19th century writers. It's funny how their legacy has continued to this day. But let's get back onto the painting. So this is super simple. I primed him in white, so the coat was already in white. And then I did a very light wash of Nuln oil on the coat and then painted in white highlights, and then painted a bit of grey, a light grey in the shadows as well. So it's pretty subtle, a bit more definition around the belt and the deeper shadows, but pretty easy to do with the white. Then I've got a grey on the pocket thing here. I think that was Mechanicus Standard Grey, highlighted with a bit of lighter grey, a bit of white added to it. Black pants, of course. When I do black these days, I usually use contrast black Templar just because it's really easy to paint on and gives me a basic highlight to start with. That's highlighted with a little bit more grey, so white added to your black. The shoes are Rhinox hide, good dark brown, there it is. And you can add a little bit of white, or if you prefer, you can add a bit of a Shabty brown. A Shabty bone to that to highlight. There's the Shabty bone. The gloves, I used an old Citadel colour called Snot Green, which is, you know, a great name. They should bring it back. I think it's a much better name than the tongue twisters they have these days. But you can just as easily use War Boss Green, something like that. Get a nice deep green. That was also washed with black, probably mixed with a little bit of Coela, or so I don't even know how to pronounce that. And then highlighted with a nice bright scorpion green. Again, that's an older colour, so I'm not sure what the latest equivalent of that is, but a nice bright green. The face mask itself is a dark grey, highlighted with lighter grey. The canister is just probably lead belcher, and as usual, lead belcher highlighted with rune fang steel. You can see I'm using the same paints over and over again. Now, for the red glow in there, now you can be really careful about this, but again, you're going to see it from a distance, so you don't have to worry too much. So when you're doing a glow, I just paint it in with a bit of Mephiston red. You can highlight that by adding a little bit of Uriel yellow, and then just a little dot of Uriel. These names, they drive me insane. And then just a little dot of the unpronounceable Uriel yellow. That'll give you a very simple red glow. Of course, you can do bits of the highlight reflecting on surfaces near it and everything, but again, that's more masterclass painting. And, you know, why bother with a figure like this? It's a very simple little figure. So there is. The bases, as usual, are done with Storm Vermin fur mixed with a bit of black, and then highlighted up with more white added to the Storm Vermin fur with a rough dry brush. And then once that's dry, I just wash it with Agrax Earthshade, and you get this really nice grubby concrete look. Black around the edge, and you're done. Next up, I've got these Nazi officers. These are super simple. They're basically black and white. You use a bit of flesh tone for the face. I usually use Kislev flesh. Kislev flesh, you might want to add just the teeniest dab of red to it, Mephiston red to it, just to give it a bit more of a fleshy tone. It's a little bit lacking in red, I find. Or maybe you could add a teeny bit of Bugman's Glow to redden it up a little bit. So do the hands and face with that. You can wash flesh with Seraphim Sepia. That's always good for washing flesh. There it is. And then the rest of the figure, it's that old contrast black again. I just painted over the whole lot. And that'll almost give you highlights as is. Though I did highlight this a little bit more with a light grey. But you can see I didn't go to a whole lot of trouble. The only thing that I did do to this to make it a bit more interesting was to add a white collar and a white trim to the edges of his cloak. Here's another one, probably a bit clearer. So just that little bit of a white trim makes it a bit more interesting because it's not a particularly interesting figure. He's just standing there straight up and down. Bit of Mephiston red for the armband and a little bit on the hat. Again, there's a bit of a white trim on the hat as well. There's lead belcher on the gun, a little bit of Runefang steel highlight. Pretty simple, little bits of Runefang steel here on the medals and a little bit of red and grey on the tops of the medals. But apart from that, little dots of Runefang steel in there for the metal again. The metal areas are washed, of course, with Nuln oil. Remember, when you're doing shiny black, something like this, you want to keep the highlights quite strong. So a strong contrast between the black and the highlight will give you a bit more of a shiny look. Of course, these figures have all been spray varnished with a semi-gloss varnish, so they look a little bit shinier than they will with a matte varnish. But basically, it's black with light grey highlights. You can just do one highlight or maybe two layers of highlights, depending how much effort you want to put in. The flesh, of course, highlight with a little bit of white mixed to your flesh colour. And while I can't get quite close enough with this camera, I sometimes do a very, very thin black line just to delineate the lips. And then you might do a slightly pinker flesh just on the lower lip. Don't do both lips because it'll look as though they're wearing lipstick. And if you just put it on the lower lip, it makes the lips look a little bit more alive, but pretty rough on the face. Okay, next up we've got 8 of these experiments. I forget what number experiment they are, but they are an experiment, and it's probably a dog originally. Pretty horrible thing, but they're pretty simple to paint. For the base colour on these, I used a mix of pallid witch flesh with a little dab of screamer pink to make it a little bit more pink. And I got this really fleshy pink tone. And I painted that over all of the flesh areas of the figure. Then I washed that. I was going to use Reichwald flesh colour, I think it's called that, but I ran out of it. So I used an unholy mix of a whole lot of bits and bobs that I had lying around. There's a little bit of Seraphim Sepia in there. There's a very old red Citadel glaze. So I just added a bit of light brown, chestnutty brown, and a bit of red to it to give myself a reddy kind of wash. And that gave me my shadow areas of this figure. Once that was thoroughly dry, I painted all the metal areas with lead belcher. That was washed with Nuln oil and also a bit of Agrax Earthshade to make it look a bit oily. You can see all those areas there, a little bit oily there. That's highlighted with Runefang steel as usual. The collar, they're just black highlighted with grey. Painted black into the mouth area and then picked out the teeth with white. It gives very strong looking teeth, you can see from a distance. The eyes are just red with a little dot of yellow. All the claws are, of course, painted in black and then highlighted with grey, and then a little strip of almost white just to give it a sharp highlight so they look sharp. It's the same on the claws at the bottom as well. Same effect I used for the scientists for the inside of these drill canisters. So red with a little bit of orange and a dab of yellow. And that's pretty much done. And then you just want to highlight the flesh to the level that you want to highlight it to. I just added more white to my palette with witch flesh and screamer pink. Because I have a wet palette, that mix was still on my palette and I could just add white to it to give a highlight colour. And then I just manually went through and brushed on some fine highlights. And it's very easy to do because it's such a sort of muscly kind of figure. You can highlight those upper areas pretty easily. And just do it until you get happy with the overall effect. Because you've got 8 of these to paint, so don't muck around with them too much. Another thing I did on some of these, and I must admit I didn't do it on all of them because I forgot, but that doesn't matter because they still look fine, is do a bit of a red glaze on the feet areas. Actually looks a little bit better. I might go back and do the other ones. A glaze is basically just a watered down mix of a paint colour. Well, you can get special glazes. It just makes these areas a little bit more red and gives a bit of variety to the skin tone. So there you go, that's Experiment 6. What is it? Experiment 6XX. Oh, by the way, when you're doing those eyes, you might want to paint them black first before you put the red in, and that just outlines the eyes a little bit better. This figure is actually a little bit better than the other one I showed. Here's another disgusting experiment thing. This is Experiment 601. Now keep in mind again that these have been varnished with a spray varnish, so they're a little bit glossier than they would be while you're painting them. But this guy's pretty simple as well, even though he's a little bit more difficult to paint just because of the shapes. But I've used the same colour I used for the Nazi soldiers and the Nazi zombies for his clothes. Plenty of lead belcher for the metal areas, black for the little pipes. And then for his horrible areas, the tail and whatever the hell's going on here, this is a mixture of Bugman's Glow and a little bit of Mephiston Red to make it even more red. That's my base colour on that one. Painted that over these fleshy areas. And then I washed that with several different washes actually. In general, it got a Seraphim sepia wash to bring out the shadow areas. Around these darker areas here, I washed it with a bit of Juchi Violet, which is a purple wash, which just makes it a little bit more interesting. And that just deepens these areas where it joins the metal, as you can see. Now, these big blistery areas, they're actually painted with mostly with red, just with a little bit of flesh, and then highlighted up to orange with a dab of yellow, and that just sets them apart a little bit from the fleshy areas around them. Ugh, it's horrible, isn't it? All the metal areas are washed with a mix of Nuln Oil and Agrax Earthshade to give that oily kind of metal. The straps and areas down here I've just done with black, that contrast black again, and highlighted with grey. And then I went through and did some manual highlighting. You can see tiny little brush strokes here and here, and they're just done with a lighter flesh colour. So a bit of white mixed to that red flesh colour. And I haven't gone to the trouble of, carefully highlighting everything, but just tiny little strokes to bring out the texture of this sort of muscly, disgusting stuff. And it looks pretty horrible, doesn't it? Really simple to do, but good from a distance. So spend as much time as you want on that. As you can see, all these little blobs and pustules and everything have just been highlighted with little dabs of highlight just to make them pop out a little bit, if you'll excuse the choice of words. And pretty much done. All the metal areas highlighted with Rubfang steel, as usual. And that's Experiment 6. What number was it? I've forgotten. Another horrible experiment. A Nazi abomination. And you're done. There's 4 of those. And I was going to stop there, but let's keep going. Because we're powering on through some of these figures now. And I'm painting these as I go, of course. And I'm up to the hero figures now. So let's get the rest of these grunts done. These guys are super simple, and again, you may want to do something more complicated, but I'm really happy with the results here. So if you look at them closely, this is the Sturmkanonier, and this is the Sturmangriff. Now, the first thing I did with both of these figures, they were primed black, which made it a lot easier because they're mostly armour and black. So I primed them black, and then I gave them all a very heavy dry brush with lead belcher. So basically, they were all metal. And that was a very easy way of getting the metal done, but still keeping some nice shadows in there. Trick is not to have it all blend into one and to have that distinctiveness between the black and the armour. And to do that, you want lots of washes. Put some brown in your wash, some Agrax Earthshade in your wash to make the armour look a bit more greasy. And also I did some blotches of Seraphim Sepia here as well to make the armour look a little bit more brown and grotty. Also, there's the little highlights of the Vril in there and on the other side as well. And in his eye holes, that's the same red, orange, yellow mixture. For the bullets, just on the edge of the bullets, I used a mix of Balthazar Gold and Warplock Bronze. For the backpack, that's Gorthor Brown, highlighted with a bit of a Shabti bone added to the brown mix. That, of course, is shaded with Agrax Earthshade. And then the black areas are the same contrast paint with a little bit of white added to black to give me a light grey to highlight it a little bit. And I roughly painted on that cross on the chest. And you don't have to be too careful with that because the chest material is very wrinkled, so the symbol can come out very wrinkled as well. Here's the other one. Again, the same effect, starting with black, heavy dry brushing with lead belcher, highlighting with Runefang steel. When you're doing your Runefang steel highlights, be a little bit careful with those because they actually really are effective to make the figure pop and add some contrast in there. When you're painting them on, they may not look very effective, but once you're finished, you'll look back and see those dabs of Runefang steel really make a difference. So we've got the Vril effect in there and in his eye holes as usual. In here, a little bit of shadow grey, I think it was. Or perhaps rust grey. I think shadow grey is one of the older ones, but it's a blue grey, highlighted with a bit of white added to that. Again, the whole thing is washed in Nuln oil, which you always do over armour, but also Agrax Earthshade, and especially on the damaged areas and around little nuts and bolts to look like they're sort of a bit greasy and rusty. There you go. I've got some highlights there on the black on his skirt. You can see done a couple of levels of highlights there. There's just a grey and then a much lighter grey just on the edges. Add a bit of definition to that. And he's done. These guys are pretty quick and easy to do. I could have used the same kind of blue armour that I did, or blue-grey armour that I did for the zombies, but these guys look so tough and covered in armour, I just thought the raw, dirty, oily metal was more effective for them. There you go, folks. That'll give you lots to get on with until next time, because next time we'll be starting on the hero figures and it'll be a bit more interesting. Getting through these batches of figures, it's okay. Once you put on some interesting things to listen to, like an audio book or a podcast, you can really just churn through these figures. And I think you'll agree, even though I haven't spent a huge amount of time on these, they still look great because you're going to be seeing them from back here. Not from way in here. Back here is where you're going to be playing, and as you can see from a distance, they look really good. There's still plenty of detail and lots of character. And you haven't agonised over them for months and months. So that's the way I paint. You don't have to agree, of course. You can spend months and months on a figure if you wish. And I'm going to be spending a little bit more time on the hero figures, and it'll be a bit more interesting. That's why I like to leave them to the end, so they're a little bit of a reward for all the hard work, and they're a bit more fun to paint. So that's what we'll be doing next time in the next episode of this series on Reichbusters. I hope you're finding it useful, and if you have any comments, please leave them in the comment section below. I answer every single comment. Always interested to hear what you have to say and about your experiences in painting and playing. Don't forget to subscribe, press the all notifications button, check me out on social media, visit the website. I've almost finished a rules summary for Reichbusters, and that'll be coming up soon. Hope you're enjoying the coverage, enjoy your games, and I'll see you next time.